Buck, you and I talked about off air this story, which I think is very intriguing. The idea of kids under the age of 18 getting in any way transgender surgeries is madness. Most states will not allow you, for instance, if you're under the age of 18, to get a tattoo. But the idea that you would be able to stop puberty or decide that you're going to have what they call top surgery, where basically you get your breast removed, that you would begin before you are an adult transitioning from one sex to another is pure madness. And what doesn't get talked about very much is the decision made, which is now becoming somewhat commonplace, right? That people are deciding, hey, I've changed genders and now I want to change back. This is Chris Beck, who, Buck, I believe you've talked to him before. He's a retired Navy SEAL who now wants to detransition, became a woman, now wants to go back to being a man. And I think we have an audio cut, but you want to tell people about...
Clearly, in this case, also became a transgender woman, because as we know, you can't actually become a woman. Correct. And now is just actually recognizing that he was always a he and a man, and that this was... He says the worst experience, the worst mistake of his entire life. And Clay, he's now using this in order to talk about this for children specifically. Here's what he says in the clip.
We want to take the emotions out of this. And let's look at it as a medical team. Let's look at it through a lot different scope. I don't want this to be political. And I don't want transgender people to be harmed. But if you're doing this to kids, that's wrong. I have a Navy SEAL friend of mine, a very good friend of mine. He has a daughter. The daughter was a tomboy. You could see it. She was a happy tomboy. She had double mastectomy at 16 years old. A Navy SEAL friend of mine. Now this person is 20, I think, and who knows what's going to happen. But they also start doing them on hormone blockers and all kinds of other hormone things, puberty blockers, everything else. It sterilizes these kids. So we're going to have all these children in 5 or 10 years who are being told one side of this story, and they're going, well, that's me. Because they're not being told stories like mine. They're not being told stories like so many other people who have detransitions. They hide the fact that I even exist. They also say that I hate transgender people. I don't hate transgender people. There's a lot of my friends. What I care about is people. I want people to slow down. I want these doctors to see what they're doing.
It's crazy, Buck.
Entirely reasonable from Kristen Beck here. And I think he's now... I think he's going back to, was he Chris Beck before this?
I think that's right.
And, Mr. Beck in this case is just saying, look, this is a guy who was he was a Navy SEAL. He was in the Navy for 20 years. And the left held him up as, see, our bravest warriors can be trans. Therefore, don't question any aspect of the trans agenda. This was the propaganda around it. And here is this warrior, this somebody who did serve honorably in the Navy for decades, and was a member of the SEAL team, coming out and saying, look, this was a terrible thing for me to do as an adult. And he thinks that the VA did one hour sit down with him and started to put him on hormone drugs. And this would have been far better, I think, in his own mind, he would now admit, for there to be a slower pace here. Think this through. But you see, Clay, part of the problem is they don't want this to be a thing that people get psychological help for, because then it starts to be clear that this is a mental health issue instead of a affirmation issue. But if you take time to speak to a therapist, people may explore that there are deeper issues here that relate to gender identity, and that it's not actually some core underlying, even immutable characteristic. It is, in fact, the most fluid of characteristics, in that it's just somebody's feelings at any point in time. And he said it himself. They're just going to ignore that he even exists now after heralding his transition for the purpose of the trans agenda.
All I would say, especially, and I think the fact that he's talking to children is so important here, the reason why many states ban kids under the age of 18 from getting tattoos is because we don't want adults to grow up and say, why in the world did I get that tattoo permanently
Yeah, and obviously
on
a
my
tattoo
body?
is a whole heck of a lot less serious
That's
than,
what I'm saying.
bottom surgery.
At 15 years old, we're like, hey, we don't think you should be able to get that barbed wire tattoo on your bicep because you might at 25 look down and say, what in the world was I doing?
I think everyone needs to see this, Clay. There is really no outer limit to this in that you've already seen. Think of the rhetoric they use and think of what has changed even the last 5 years. Bill Maher said the Don't Say Gay bill, which is actually the don't indoctrinate small children in public schools into trans ideology and create transgender contagion, which is a thing that was studied at Brown University until they shut it down right away. They realize that they've been moving so fast on this in recent years, people might start to figure out what the ultimate goal is. When they say that doctors make a mistake in gender with a baby, and what they're effectively saying here is they want to declare that transgenderism is something that is innate and from birth. So then it gets full care. So even though it may not manifest itself until much later on, it is innate at your birth. But we look at this and we say, well, hold on a second. There's actually a truly physical, you want to talk about immutable characteristics? We're talking about whether somebody has the male parts or female parts here.
Yeah.
They are negating that. It is not, I know this is crazy, but the same way that they don't say you become a transgender female, you become a female. And everyone needs to understand that too. It's not, oh, there's this other category of transgender. No, you are a female, and anyone who says otherwise is a bigot. They also say that gender at birth is not a thing. And I know that's crazy, but that is actually what the ideology takes us to.
The biology argument is a non-starter. And so I would just say, in particular for children, you can't get a tattoo before you're 18. You can't vote before you're 18. You can't buy a beer until you're 21. In many states, you can't rent a car until you're 25. And yet they're going to allow a 14-year-old to have her breast cut off because she thinks that she's a boy. I mean, this is
Can I just point this out
craziness.
too, Clay? I mean, do you think that any of the, let's say a 14-year-old goes into one of these gender transition clinics, right? 14-year-old girl. I'm actually a boy. I wonder how many doctors that work in these clinics would say, hey, just so you know, if we go through this whole process, there are not only going to be absolutely long-term health complications. You're probably going to be sterile. You'll never be able to have children. But also there are people who go through this whole thing and think that they were mistaken. Do you think that any of these medical practitioners, I mean, maybe some of them do, but based on there is a zealotry involved here with a lot of the people that work at these clinics where you are living your truth. Your truth is the thing that pushes you to transition, and anything that gets in the way of transition is regressive and bigotry. Even the production of facts and data and reality to help a young person make that choice.
Just think about this, Buck. How many surgeries that are voluntary and not medically necessary are allowed on minors in the United States, which would render them sterile, potentially?
What would you say? You know, what would you or Laura say if you had a friend who said, our 13-year-old daughter wants to get breast implants? You'd say, what are you doing?
I would say that's crazy. I mean, I think
Right.
any minor child having any unnecessary cosmetic surgery is very questionable. But when it could potentially render you sterile for life,
Clay,
that is
think about this, though.
the absolute apex of crazy.
We could all agree that breast augmentation surgery for a 13-year-old girl would be deeply
Crazy.
medically
Yeah.
unethical and crazy. But permanent removal of the fatty
I know.
tissue from the breast forever is ethical. It's a lot of, I want these MDs, they're going to hide by their credentials to work at these clinics. I would like them to try to make this argument in public if it's really about health and medicine. I'd like them to explain to me why one is okay and the other is not.
No. I mean, there should be, I believe, every state should prohibit minors having any sort of gender affirmation or gender reassignment surgery. Buck, the data reflects that when you get on these puberty blockers, your bones don't develop as strong as they would the rest of your life. So you're not only delaying and destroying the ability of your body to naturally become an adult, but you are also weakening the physical bone structure of all of these transgender people from youth for the rest of their lives.
Look, ultimately this is a psychiatric condition, but they're creating this whole protocol of physical changes for the transition to make it seem like, oh no, this is just medical care. This is like, getting a stent for your heart or something. This is just the standard medical care that we do for people to keep them healthy and functioning. It's psychiatric in nature. It is not actually standard medical care. But look what the medical community is doing right now with COVID still. I mean, there's so much going wrong right now.
I mean, here's your point about the kid having breast augmentation surgery is a great one. Just ask this. If you decide you want to change your gender, I mean, that's a heroic thing to do. If you decide you want to change your race, that's the one that people can't get past, because you change your race, it's super racist of you to even consider that you could do that. Yet race is much more of an identity than gender, right? There's much less of a biological reality.
Race is far more on a spectrum in terms of, many people are, multiracial. My own nephew is multiracial.
Lots of people don't even know their races until they do the DNA stuff. They find out that they're actually not the race that they thought they were, right? Like,
yeah,
it's really fascinating.
It's amazing.